actually go in, I'm going to kind of establish a little back information about what's going on here at the fort, just so you guys have an idea of the larger picture, not just the small pinhole of actually what's going on in the house. But this fort was first established in 1872, and the reason for establishment was, well, there was this big push at the time to connect the United States. The idea was that you'd have another transcontinental road coming through the north here, and it would go all the way from the Great Lakes to Washington. However, going ahead of the guys actually building the track were surveyors. So surveyors, engineers, and guys like that. And when they got out here, they would run into Native American tribes who believed that they were encroaching on their territory, most namely Lakota Sioux. And they were afraid out here because they would often be attacked and harassed, and not wanting to just fall prey, they asked for aid from the federal government. And this came in the form of the infantry post over on the hill over there. If you guys have time later today, I recommend going up there. It's a pretty nice view just of the river, but also Bismarck and Mandan. But, so the infantry post was established, and as these two companies of infantrymen would be able to intimidate the Native Americans, or they would be able to defend if there ever were any more attacks. And this did not work. Now, typically, Native American tribes out here, mostly Dakota Sioux, are known for being horseback riding. And the infantry, which are guys walking on foot, would not be able to keep up with them. So, in addition, they didn't really intimidate them either because, they could attack and be gone before the infantry ever showed up and wasn't really much use. So they expand the fort, to everything down here. This here is the cavalry section of the post and what this post really became known for. I'd like to point out that they also changed the name of the post. Before, when it was just the infantry over there, it would be called Fort McKean. However, when they expanded it down here, they decided to change it to Fort Abraham Lincoln. And the reason they did this is because nothing was really named after Abraham Lincoln yet. This is a good way to honor the recently dead president. Also, if you have a much larger fort, you need a much grander name. But it would look like a small town back in the day. You would have had everything you could really think of a town would need. You would have had a schoolhouse. You'd have a chapel later. You would have had a dead house, place for storing people who died during the winter time. You got everything. And that dead house would be pretty important because over at the barracks where the regular soldiers were living, that was not the very best conditions, to say the least. And it was so bad that soldiers would actually freeze or starve to death. Sorry, not starve. They'd freeze to death during the winter. You could usually expect about 5 guys to just fall asleep and then not wake up the next morning per year. And that was kind of the opposite of what all the guys living on this side were experiencing. Now, these guys were all been officers. Everyone who went to West Point and would have received an education in doing this whole war thing. They would have been second lieutenants or higher, but they would have been living about 6-7 guys per building, with a lot of them have their wives and their family members here as well, too. But this building was kind of unique among the officers. This would have belonged to the post commander, George Armstrong Custer, but this is actually a recreation of the second house that he lived in here at the fort. First house was in the exact same spot. However, it burned down in 1874, in February. That'll be relevant later in the tour. But when it burned down, Custer was not upset at all because he hated that first house. It was just some bland cookie-cutter army house, and what did he do? Well, he decided to change the blueprints. And he added a couple things like this wraparound porch, about 1,000 square footage, and a couple of things I'll point to when we go inside. But he was able to build a much nicer house on the Army's dollar. But who is Custer? Well, I'm going to refresh your guys' memory real quick just in case you don't know who he is, but you likely do. He's a pretty famous guy. Custer is most known for really his 3 years here at the fort. Now, these are the past 3 years of his life. And during that time, he would go off to lead the Black Hills expedition. Now, during this expedition, he would go to the Black Hills. Well, on paper, that mission is to establish military forts in the reservation, around the reservation. However, he brought along prospectors and geologists with him, as well as newspaper journalists. So if there was gold down there, they were going to find it, and they did find gold. This led into an escalation of tension between the United States and the Native American tribes, which eventually exploded into his next campaign, where Custer goes off and dies at the Battle of Little Bighorn. He's known for a couple other things, though. He is known for, first off, being a Union officer during the Civil War, where he rose again from the rank of second lieutenant all the way to the rank of major general. He also took part in Reconstruction during the South, where he was not the most effective at his job, but he still took part. And also he was a Native American fighter in other parts of the United States like Kansas. Now, are there any questions or comments so far? All right, perfect. So, before we actually go into the house, I need to establish a couple ground rules. And the first rule is, please don't touch anything when we go in there. It's still a museum. You guys are all adults, not a bunch of kids, so I don't have an issue, but I still want to put that out there in case anyone kind of keep that in mind. Also, stick with the tour group, please. So don't walk off in the house on your own. I swear we'll see every building, every room when we get in there. So don't worry about going off and exploring on your own. In addition, I do 2 kinds of tours, and I'm going to let you guys kind of choose which one you want. First tour is a first-person living history tour where I do my best to pretend I am a soldier in the year 1875, and I'm showing you guys around Custer's house. If we do that kind of tour, I won't be able to talk about certain things, such as the Battle of Libbie Custer and Custer testifying against the Grand Administration. If we do a regular tour, I'll be able to talk about that things, but also, the comparison I'd like to make is that if you guys really want to interact with me, the first-person tour might be a little bit more entertaining, but if you really have a lot of questions, in the third-person tour, where I kind of speak to you guys frankly, it might be a little bit more educational. So it's kind of up to you guys which one you prefer. I know that you guys obviously don't know each other, so could be some disagreements, but I'll probably just be a tiebreaker if there is.
What do you guys want to do? You want to do the history or you want to do the educational one?
I say educational, but that's up to you guys.
I like the educational one. There might be some questions you guys might have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Yeah, I think we're good.
All right, perfect. That means I have to cover less rules. So, all right, we're going to head right in the building and get started.
Okay.
I'm going to go into this building right here. This room right here.
So this is a recreation of the second house. When is this?
89.
Oh, this is the second house that was built, right?
Yes.
Okay.
89. Oh, so he's long dead.
So, or no, 1989 is when we started building it.
How much bigger in square footage was this in the Sturgis?
About 1,000. So, significantly bigger.
Yeah.
But, this here is the parlor. This is where Custer would be entertaining his guests and things like that. Now, oftentimes they resort to music. His wife actually played the piano. His sister, who actually lived here before, would play things like the harp. Occasionally, they'd have to find other means of entertaining themselves to the frontier and a lot of options. So Custer would usually put on plays for at the granary for the regular soldiers and things like that, or resort to other means like playing chess and stuff. But before I really talk much more, I want to point out these photographs over here. So first off, this one up here, we have a picture of Custer sitting in a chair with his signature long locks. And I'd like to mention that I've heard that some of the regular soldiers actually gave him some pretty bad nicknames because of his hair. Now, at West Point, guys would have started calling him Fanny because they thought it was effeminate. But people also call him Cinnamon because he washed it with cinnamon soap and things like that. So, he didn't very much like these names, but one little tidbit to be aware of. Now, across the room is his wife, Libbie, or Elizabeth Custer. She is living here before. She was living in this building with him, and she was his wife since during the Civil War. Between them is his brother Tom. Now, Custer is pretty good at making sure his family members were serving with him here in the military. During the Civil War, he's able to get Tom actually on his staff. But Tom would have been a lieutenant, and he lived all the way at the far end of the row here. Now, not the only family members either. Boston worked in supply. He was his other younger brother. He couldn't pass a physical examination to be a soldier because he had asthma, so he just found a different way to work with the military. Similar kind of story with his nephew Henry over here. In addition, his sister was married to a Lieutenant Calhoun, and he also lived here before with his sister as well. Now, at the Battle of Bighorn, none of these guys would survive. All of them went off to the battle in his column and ended up dying. fact that even these two guys at supply who weren't part of the force ended up hearing that he needed guns and ammo and things, grabbed as much as they could carry, ran to the battlefield, and they also did not return. Now, Custer had a third final brother, a Nevitz, who stayed home and basically was a farmer, and there might have been something to that, because he did not die in battle. Now, any questions? Okay then, we're going to head on to the next room.
Is there a record of the place that they would put on?
There, I believe they just put like Shakespeare plays and things like that. But I've seen photographs of them doing stuff that's a bit sillier. I don't have I don't know of any written records or anything for certain, but you might be able to make something up.
I just read a story in Minnesota Historical Society magazine about Shakespeare being really popular among soldiers at that time.
Yeah, Shakespeare was very popular. It was interesting because there was a lot of higher class people thought Shakespeare was for them, but also many lower class people, like regular soldiers and things, also believed that Shakespeare was their type of play and things like that. There's this huge conflict between the two classes of who Shakespeare really belonged to. But this here's a dining room area. This is where Custer would have been dining. Now he ate way better than regular troops. It would have paid to be posting commander out here. Regular guys dressed up like me are going to be eating things like salted pork, beans, hardtack, not very tasty stuff. They did have a company garden, but it rarely produced a lot of food. But Custer's going to be eating pickled, bottled, canned goods, things like that. Anything's able to ship all the way from the east. But here's a bit of a weird question. Do you guys know what his favorite food was? Or any guesses?
Buffalo.
It's not buffalo. His favorite food is actually raw onions. So apparently he liked to eat them like apples, and he'd usually walk around the floor just munching on them. His wife would actually take an issue with his breath because of this, and she'd put on lavender perfume to kind of cover up the smell. But I would like to point out some of the original artifacts in this room and the one we just came from. The drapes over there at the very end of the hall are going to be original from the 1870s. Libbie would have shipped them over here by rail, as well as this butler tray over here in the corner. Now, while the drapes belong to Custer, this butler's tray would have just belonged to another officer. We just have it here to show what it was like living here. Now, are there questions?
So there are actual artifacts from the Custer household.
There are, yes, like those drapes, a couple of things of one too. Most of the stuff here are just artifacts from somewhere in the forest.
So the red part of the drape, whatever that's called?
Yes.
Has that been recolored or anything? That color is still?
I don't know how much restoration was put into maintaining it, but I just know that they're original pieces.
It looks pretty.
Okay, so the house was built by the archives. That was the history archives.
Yes.
What about the furniture?
So, a lot of the furniture, again, we just have photographs and we're able to say, we don't have that exact thing in the photograph of, Custer in here, but we can get something close or another antique from the time period. But because of, I mentioned this to these two, but when the fort was decommissioned, people at Bismarck came here and they looted the place. They took all the buildings and all the furniture. It is very hard to come by those original pieces because of that. Because, not everyone's grandma and grandpa necessarily documented what they stole because they're stealing things. So a couple things we have have been tracked down or have been donated and things like that.
Okay. Are you going to talk about Custer's early life or why he seems to have been pretty arrogant?
If you want to ask questions, if you ask questions about stuff, I don't usually cover it, but I'll touch on his time in the Civil War and things like that.
Okay.
But he did grow up he was a fairly arrogant guy. This can be seen during his time at West Point. He was a bit of a prankster, didn't really follow rules. He had over 700 demerits when he was there and things like that. He still passed though, but his arrogance originated when he was much younger than when he died. Any other questions?
Did you see the movie Little Big Man?
A long time ago, yeah, a long time ago.
So they depicted him pretty accurate now.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to watch that again.
All right, we're gonna move on to the next room over here.
Yeah, the big man. I see that.
Yeah, Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah.
Wow. That is amazing.
So this here is the kitchen. Now, usually on Victorian era houses, the kitchen is actually separate. It's a big source of heat and also it's a fire hazard. But this is a military post. You can't have two buildings for one guy, even if the post commander. So the solution, compromise rather, are these two doors. Throw them open, let some of the heat out, and let it breeze in. But what I really like to point out is actually the basement down there. Now that basement, all the brickwork is original from the very first house that burned down. Brick's really pretty fireproof, so it was able to stay, and they were used on the second house. But he kept quite a few things like down there, tools, food, and also something even more lively. And that would have been a bobcat. Now Custer, he had a lot of pets, and he just loved animals, and I guess he thought, well, what better pet than a bobcat? Because he captured one and kept it chained in the basement.
Oh, wow.
Now, I didn't stay there forever, so don't worry. He ends up sending it to New York, where he has connections to a zoo, where it ends up living the rest of its life. We don't know what happened to it after that. But it wasn't the only animal he captured out here either. And that would have been a bison calf. Now, this belonged more to Tom, more than Custer, more than George. But it still had a pretty big... It was still his pet, essentially. Now, I'm sorry, I can't speak for some reason. But what I really like to bring up with the bison calf is that actually, one day when head May was out here cooking, I guess the bison calf smelled the cooking, escaped the corral, ran in here and yelled the rashes in the kitchen. So it was a bit of a nuisance animal as well, and he ended up sending it to New York as well. But are there any questions about this room?
So Libbie is an officer's wife, or Elizabeth is an officer's wife. She has people to help her, right? She's not the primary
Yes.
housekeeper.
So, Custer, I'll show you guys in a second when we get upstairs, but he was able to, basically he paid for a couple of maids. Now, we had some discrepancies in the past, but what we finally figured out is that he would have had two maids and then likely one of the other maids, his son, living in here with them. And they basically would have done all the cooking and cleaning and things like that. And Custer would pay for them out of pocket because the Army just doesn't pay for people to have maids. So he would have shared this cost with his brother Tom. Any other questions?
Were they steam shipping all this stuff upriver? Was this Keelpa, or how was all this material?
So the rail would have delivered a lot of stuff because it would have hit Bismarck, but not able really to get over the river. They had a ferry, and they did likely have to ship things by boat as well.
When was the rail finished into Bismarck?
Oh gosh, I think it's actually
Was it during the time of the house that was built?
yes. It was. I want to say the same year Custer died, so 76, but after he left. But I'm not confident on that. You might have to ask another laundress out front. She might know.
And then a lot of there wouldn't be any wood here at this point, like not many trees.
Actually, the soldiers would have to travel about 3 miles to get wood for the fires and things because Army Fort here is going to drain the resources from the surrounding area. And they needed firewood, so they're constantly just chopping trees farther and farther away.
Yeah.
They weren't doing charcoaling here, were they? We've done Fort Snelling in Minnesota, and they were cutting a lot of trees for charcoal. So the blacksmith.
I don't believe so. There's a blacksmith here, but I don't believe they're doing much charcoaling.
In Montana on the Bozeman Trail, you'd have wood parties that would go out and be harassed, during Red Cloud's War. Was this fort? If they'd go out 3 miles, that's pretty good distance. Were they just sparring or?
They'd go armed. They would be
Okay.
larger parties, not just like 1 or 2 guys, but you'd have your wagons and your horses and things like that. Because again, it's not necessarily a fighting fort, it's more a place for deployment of troops.
Gotcha.
But they would still be under guard because occasionally some people did disappear in the night and things like that.
Okay.
And we didn't get a chance to talk about the bathroom.
I usually just kind of skip over it. That is basically just the women's restroom.
Oh.
It's where the ladies of the house would have been using, not necessarily the maids or Custer himself, because they're going to be using chamber pots or going to the outhouse out back. But alright, we're going to head up the stairs now and head to the next room.
No screens at this point yet.
No, you'll kind of see upstairs what they're going to be using for the blood. Alright, but this is where the maids would have been living. The oldest maid, of course, got her own bedroom. It's because she's the oldest of the two siblings. His younger sibling. The other maid was her younger sibling. And they also divided the work that way. And the younger sibling had the unfortunate job of cleaning out these guys under the bed. These are chamber pots, so this is where you're going to go to the bathroom during the night. But because they made $250 a year, they would be making way more than the average troop. So, private like me, it's going to make about $13 a month. And I don't even get to keep it all because I would give $1 to a laundress to clean my clothes, another $1 to the Veteran Society for retirement and things like that. So really, I'd only keep $11, and they would have trouble holding on to that because the only way to get supplies and buy things was to buy it from the commissary building, where merchants who had contracts with the government would charge double the average prices, or you'd have to make the pilgrimage into the very dangerous town of Bismarck. And think of like a picturesque Wild West town in like the movies. That's kind of what Bismarck was. Like, it was ridiculously dangerous. 4th Street today, it used to be called Murderer's Gulch. Like, a lot of soldiers went in there and just got shot and things like that.
Who are the sources of danger?
So, first off, it's a frontier town with all of the bells and whistles with that. So you're going to have people who are trying to make money based off of, less legitimate means. But you're also going to have many homesteaders who just kind of want to be away from everything. And in addition, this fort had a problem with desertions. So they usually expect about 2-3 desertions per month. There's a lot of reasons for this. But one of the reasons is that a lot of people joined the military back in the day to get away from crimes somewhere in the east. What better way to get away from your crimes than being shipped far to the west and then just desert when you get out here? So there were some deserters and criminals who'd always be hanging around and trying to make money however they could. Are there any other questions so far? Okay, we're going to head down the hall then.
With the kerosene would have been the
Yes, kerosene and whale oil.
whale. Still.
So first off, all the White Marbles on pieces of furniture, not just in this room, but in the rest of the house, are going to be original from somewhere on the fort. There's going to be one there, and one there as well. And this room is called, it's the guest bedroom. This is where anyone who's visiting Custer would be spending the night. And typically you didn't come out to the frontier to spend a single evening. It took a lot of effort to get out here. You have to travel by rail and then take a ferry over the river. So you're going to be spending days or even weeks at a time. Now, are there any questions about this room?
Did the Custers often have guests?
I don't know the exact number of people staying here, but at the very least, they actually usually had Tom, because even though he lived a couple doors down, he always wanted to spend the night with his brothers because they were very close.
I can't imagine why.
Yeah.
Looks like everybody's going through this room to get to other places.
Yes. Yeah. But all right, we're gonna head into this room behind me. But this is just the second guest bedroom. But I'd like to point out that it had a second purpose, and that was this couch over here. This here is called a fainting couch. So if there are any women at maybe a party I was hosting or just female guests, and they were feeling faint or suffering from what they called the vapors, well, she'd come over here and faint on this fainting couch. And I would also like to point out that it is on the second floor. So if she's feeling faint downstairs, well, she's got to run up the stairs and try to make it to the back of the house. Hopefully, if she didn't, a man would be able to carry her and place her on this couch. But the real reason it's in this room is these two windows. Throw them open, you got the most ventilation in the entire house. They also kind of had heat in mind when they built this house. Obviously, this is North Dakota. And they would do that with these kind of circular vents here. I don't know, guys, if you guys noticed, but there were 5 chimneys on this house. Sorry, there are 6 chimneys, 5 of them are working. One of them is just because Custer thought it would look uneven with 5 chimneys. But the reason you need so many chimneys is because in rooms like this, you can take out an iron stove, hook up the vents to the chimney here, and that way you'll be able to keep this place nice and warm while allowing the smoke to go up the vents and out the chimney, so it's not get super smoky here in this room.
So each room would have had its own small wood stove.
So they were mobile. You could move them around. But yeah, I invite you guys to take a look and kind of see where they're located around the house. Kind of see, it shows you where they needed to eat back in the day. But alright, we're going to move on to the room behind me. Unless there's any more questions.
This was the infantry project in the house.
Yes.
Come on upstairs.
It's a comfortable looking house.
But this here is basically gentlemen's rooms. Now, it used to be 2 bedrooms, but Custer wanted a place to entertain his officers and things like that, male guests. So he decided to knock the wall down, and this is where we have a bit of a game room. And Custer would be playing games like billiards, cards, and bridge with his fellow officers, but they would not be playing pool. Because back then, pool was a gambling game, and he didn't allow that in the fort. Now, he was lenient with his fellow officers, but if you were a enlisted man like Andres as, you would not have been allowed to gamble or drink at the fort. Granted, this is a military fort out in the west, so 100 guys over there, 150 guys up there, there's only so much you can do to prevent that stuff here at the fort. However, some guys would want to circumvent this problem entirely, and they would actually swim to the town of Bismarck. Problem is, once you get there and you get inebriated, it's not so easy to swim back. So quite a few guys actually drowned in the river because of that. This became an issue. It's where the top 3 causes of death here at the fort before the Battle of Libbie Custer was going to be freezing to death, drowning to death, and then being shot by citizens of Bismarck. So not really related to fighting at all. But I'd also like to point out these photographs on the wall. So go get closer and take a look if you'd like. But Custer, on the photograph on the left, is seating on the very right. You'll notice him with his long locks and his interesting designs on his sleeves. We also have Custer sitting on the right photograph on the very left, Custer General Pleasanton. Now, the reason his uniform is different from everyone else is because, well, frankly, he's very arrogant and he just wants to stand out. He wants to be seen as this knight coming to save the day, turning the tide of battlefields and things like that. However, it has a second use, and that is allows his troops more easily able to identify him and more easily able to follow his commands and things like that on the battlefield. Now, this comes with the caveat that his enemy can now pick him out in a crowd of soldiers. Custer, though, he doesn't care. Again, he's fairly arrogant, he is pretty confident in his own martial ability, and he's also a cavalry officer. So if you're a cavalry officer, you're not staying in line and firing and doing things that is more luck-based, because your life is more in your own hands than it is if you're an infantryman. You're participating in flanks, you are doing charges and things like that. A lot of brigadier generals actually, well, I think is one of the officers who died the most. But your life is very much more in your hands because you're not necessarily doing things where your life is more at luck. Now, any questions so far?
Go ahead. Oh, I was just gonna ask, how long was a typical enrollment for a private,
So,
are you committing
5-year enlistment. And then if you re-enlist, you can get $2 extra pay.
Is there a photograph of him over there too?
Say that again?
Is there a photograph of him over there too?
Yes, there's a photograph of him. This is during his time in the South, during Reconstruction. He's going to be featured in the middle with his brother, and then his father's actually featured over here in this photograph as well. So this is actually... So actually, I recommend you guys come over here real quick, because in this photograph, we have a rare image of Tom's right side. And I like to point that out because during the war, Tom was shot in the face, where the bullet went from his chin here and took off his bottom earlobe. And so almost all of his photographs have him of his left side of his face because of that. But this is a rare instance to kind of see the markings right here.
Where was Custer's service in the Civil War? Was he with Grant or was he?
He was on the Eastern Front. So beginning of the war, he's in McClellan. Then he was usually under Sheridan when Grant got more involved. General Pleasanton was also a superior officer for a while. He's basically a cavalry officer on the Eastern Front. I don't know. I haven't memorized all the battles or anything. I know he was in Gettysburg and things like that, but yeah, any other questions? Okay, then we're gonna head downstairs.
Yeah, just real quick. His dogs.
Yes.
These.
So that is a painting of his favorite 3 dogs.
Okay.
But he actually had about 40 plus dogs here before. The reason for that is because, first off, he is a huge dog lover. He usually has a dog or two in his 10-dog campaign. But when he got here to the fort, he's like, I'm going to breed dogs and sell them puppies. Problem is that when a dog lover lays the rise of puppies, can't get rid of them, so he's accumulated more and more dogs.
There's a few photos taken of him with them as well out in front, or him gunning him. Yeah,
there are. Yeah. We don't have any in this house, but there are some of those.
So was a pool table here at the time?
Yes, it would have been like different material, probably not as clean, nice as we only have right now, but they would have had one with like ivory balls and things like that.
Even though they didn't gamble, they still played.
They still played, they just wouldn't play for money.
Okay. Okay.
Where was Custer's commanding officer been? Was he way out east? Like when he was
okay, so Custer was the post commander, mostly because he had some pretty good friends in the military from higher up, and they were able to get him a more permanent position out here. But he is only a lieutenant colonel during his time in the fort, and his colonel, Samuel Sturgis, is always in the east. Because again, this fort had a huge problem with staffing its companies. Companies were usually at around half capacity. So he would constantly be doing recruiting missions and things like that over in the east.
He didn't have a problem with everything that Custer
No.
did in his own. Probably wanted to
After the battle, his son also died in the Battle of Bighorn.
Oh, wow.
And Samuel Sturgis would have come here and occupied this house until this fort was decommissioned. He actually added a couple of things, but we keep the Custer House, not the Sturgis House, because no one wants to go take it to a Sturgis house. Alright, we're going to go downstairs.
Was the town of Sturgis named after that Sturgis?
Correct, yes. We're going to go to this room on the left. Okay, so before I say anything, there's a lot of stuff in this room. I could talk about, I'd probably do a whole tour if I did just this room. And I'm not going to have time to talk about everything, so if there's anything in here that particularly interests you folks, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to let you guys kind of look around and think of things while I talk about one or two things and I'll ask you again. But first off, Custer is a huge writer. During the Civil War, he was constantly writing letters home to his friends and family. But more recently, at his time at the fort, he would be writing for magazines and newspapers and things like that. Now, behind you guys, over here, is a officer's field desk, and this is one of the few original pieces here in the house. This field desk was not Custer's, it was used by another officer. But basically, if you're on campaign and you need to get your writing done, deal with Army bureaucracy, well, you can deploy your field desk here, sit down, and deal with that. Now it folds up and it's really not that heavy. Also, this footlocker here is an original piece as well. Now, again, I'm going to ask you guys, is there anything in here that particularly interests you?
What about the taxidermist that are put in this house?
Ah, okay. So, Custer actually got into taxidermy before he died. But during his time here at the fort, none of the stuff would have been his because his stuff didn't last very long. And he likely would have had this place mostly decorated from stuff he might have hunted by other people's taxidermy. Because again, I've seen some pictures of it stuff and it looks pretty atrocious. And I'm going to show you guys this pet unless anyone's particularly squeamish. So, someone maybe help me and open up this desk drawer here. We can meet his pet. Alright. Tell me what we see in there.
Mice? A
It's
mouse?
He had a pet field mouse. And during his time here at the court, it died. Mice don't take me live very long. But he couldn't say goodbye to the creature, so he would have stuffed it himself and put it in his writing desk drawer here, so that if he's writing for long hours and needs some companionship, well, he can open up the desk drawer and say hi to his friend in there, and maybe encourage him to just keep on writing.
Okay.
What kind of stories did he write for Harper's? Brave Western stuff.
All about himself.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah. Life on the Plains, I believe, is his magazine. At least the article he wrote for Life on. Yes, he wrote. It's an article name he wrote for a magazine. He also wrote about other things. One of my favorite stories of he wrote in for a newspaper is actually when he went on a hunt during a campaign. And now, during this campaign, he would, of course, decide to go hunting because why not? And he saw some buffalo. He got on his horse and chased them about 3 miles. Now, when he finally rode up alongside the buffalo to shoot it with a revolver, the buffalo decided it had other plans and decided to turn to gore his horse. Now, Custer is a pretty good horseman, and when he went to try to gain control of the animal, he accidentally shot his horse instead of the buffalo and ended up shooting out from under him. Now, he wasn't hurt, but he had to walk back about 3 miles to the rest of his forces. And it's pretty interesting when your commander rides out on a horse and then doesn't come back with one. So he made sure to publish that newspaper himself so that no one else could get a word in about the story. That was one of his more humbling things he's written. Any other questions?
Visitors, I see Sheridan's on the wall.
Yes.
Did he ever come out?
So Sheridan, I don't believe he ever came out.
Okay, to this post, yeah.
Custer frequently went east on New York, things like that, so he might have engaged in there and things like that. But I don't believe Sheridan ever came to this post.
Is that McClellan?
Yes. So, for those of you who aren't aware, McClellan and Custer had a bit of a connection. Now, again, if anyone doesn't know, McClellan is the highest ranking Union officer during the very beginning of the Civil War. And Custer was basically put on his staff during the war, and Custer basically worshipped the man because of it. Despite them being very different people, I wouldn't someone say fell in love, but he obviously was already married. But McClellan had Custer do a lot of scouting missions and things like that, riding out on his horse, looking for any positions. One of my favorite little things he had to do actually was he had Custer fly up in a hot air balloon and take sketches and notes of his location. McClellan also promoted him to captain when he realized he was more than just hot air. But their relationship persisted even after the Civil War. Now, Custer tried to help McClellan get elected for president. Of course, he was going up against Lincoln, and this didn't really go anywhere. This wouldn't be the first presidential campaign Custer would be on, though. He tried to help Andrew Johnson get reelected, but again, his opponent was Grant. And those are both, Lincoln and Grant, are very hard guys to beat. Any final things before we move on?
Did he have much to say about Reconstruction? Where was he in Reconstruction?
He was in Texas for a while. He wasn't there the whole time though. I do know that he necessarily wasn't the most effective person for this job. First off, because while he might be a good battlefield commander, he was terrible at managing things at a large scale. His troops, he punished them pretty severely, and they did not appreciate it. Also, he could be swayed by large landowners to maybe they'd invite him into his house and wine and dine him essentially, and he'd get distracted and probably not do his job as he should have been doing.
But Grant never got mad at him. Or you said he testified against him?
So, the Grand Administration is kind of notorious for being filled with corruption. He was pretty bad at choosing people to be in the government. And because of this, Custer was eventually chosen to kind of testify against corruption, particularly with the Indian Native American Bureau Management. Something like that.
Bureau of Indian
Thank you.
Affairs. Yeah.
I figured you might know.
Yeah.
You're nodding your head. But when he testified, Grant was actually upset by this, and he tried to basically prevent Custer from participating in any more military operations. Ironically, though, his friend Sheridan made sure that Custer was on the next campaign to go fight the Native Americans, where Custer died at the Battle of the Bighorn. So,
And Grant loved Sheridan.
he was a huge fan of Sheridan. He trusted him quite highly. So it's a little bit of a interesting thing there is that Custer's friendship with Sheridan usually would have brought him out of trouble, but eventually his friendship ended up getting him killed because he made sure he went off to go fight the Native Americans only to die. Anything else? Okay, well, for the sake of time, I'm actually just going to keep pushing us farther to us here. Alright, but this here is the bedroom. This is where Custer would have been sleeping. But the most significant thing I have to say is actually the chimney. Now, this chimney is where the fire in the first house would have started. Would have been a chimney fire up in the attic. And what I want to point out is that this was a pretty bad fire because it happened in February. So the banks of the Missouri were frozen. So there's no getting water over here to fight the fire. In addition, the Army built this place pretty cheaply and pretty poorly. So they used petroleum wallpaper. So this place went up in flames pretty quick. However, that night, Libbie and Custer were sleeping here. She woke up first, and like a good wife, she woke her husband up to go check out the fire. When he discovered the fire, they evacuated everyone from the house safely, so no one was hurt. But I would like to mention that they forgot to bring this chair with them. This chair is an heirloom from Libbie's father, and she actually, this is the actual piece here. So she demanded that actually Custer run back in here and save the chair from the fire. And if you're Custer and your wife is telling you to run to her burning building, what do? Well, you stand up straight, you put on a game face, and you tell someone else to get the chair. Because you're the post commander out here, your job is the only thing that will risk their lives. So Custer had to some private had to run in here, grab the chair to escape the flames. Custer did have fire in the mine though, because he added this door here and that door there on the second house. So there will be a second fire while it can escape the flames and run right outside here, or run to the hallway and escape from the front of the rear. And hopefully he can bring the chair the first time. Now, other questions about this room?
These headboards are so tall.
They are, yes.
Style it.
Honestly though, they wouldn't have looked that tall with him sleeping in it, because he liked to sleep sitting up.
Wow.
Now, the reason they did this is because at the time they believed it was good for your health. A lot of doctors believe this. So Custer was not going to go against any doctors, and he followed, and he slept sitting up. But alright, we're going to move on to this room behind. Now this room here is basically Libbie's room. This is where she does her sewing and things like that. Now, she was a wealthy lady, but even for a wealthy lady, it's expensive shipping things away by rail from the east. So she decided to just make and mend her own clothing here in this room. She made really dark and elaborate clothing to the point where it took her about 2.5 hours to get dressed in the morning. You guys want to see what this looked like? I have a photograph on the wall with Custer and Libbie. A lot of buttons on that. Well,
So was she like a style horse like her husband?
Say it again?
A style horse like fancy clothes
Oh,
to match her
yes.
husband?
Yes. She's a socialite and she's a higher class lady, so of course she's going to wear nice clothing. But that other woman in the photograph is Eliza Brown. Now, she was an escaped slave during the Civil War and actually encountered Custer's camp during '63, and he decided to hire her on as a cook. And she stayed with him for quite a few years, about 2 years before actually coming to the fort. But I would like to point out she's actually recaptured by the Confederates during the war.
Oh my God.
Okay.
During a battle, Custer's army got separated from the wagon train, and some Confederate horsemen came around and captured her. Now, on their way back to the camp, they encountered a large fence the horses just couldn't jump over. And if you're a bunch of Confederate horsemen and you have an escaped slave, you're going to make the escaped slave do all the work. So they told her to go dismantle the fence for them. So she goes over to the fence, she takes part at the very bottom, slips underneath, and then runs off, never to be seen again. So she's able to escape from them the same day she was captured, and later re-encountered Custer's camp that day. Are there any questions so far?
Interesting.
Okay then, we're going to head into the back porch here.
Sure believe in high ceilings back then.
Oh yeah.
It's an amazing house.
I think they're around 12 feet tall. Alright, I'm going to kind of step over here. But as I mentioned before, Custer would have lived here the past 3 years of his life before going and dying in the Battle of Little Bighorn. He would have gone that direction between those two stone columns there, and the procession of men, supplies, guns, ammo, food, things like that would have been about 2 miles long. But after he didn't return, suddenly his wife and his sister were widows here at the fort. Because again, all the men in the family died. Or at least all the men who were here. And his wife, well, the army would have given her and his sister about 2-3 weeks to move out here. Because the army can't just be housing widows, it's got to be housing fighting men. And they were basically, in the short term, they went to Bismarck, which they did not enjoy because, again, it's very rough, dangerous Wild West town. But they didn't stay there forever. Libbie helps the other widows in their little transitional process onto the rest of their lives. Libbie, she ends up moving to New York herself. She designs fashion and things like that, but she also writes books about her time here at the fort. We actually use her as a reference for research and things like that. In addition, she becomes a lecturer for many universities, mostly talking about American history and Custer and things like that in particular. Now, I would like to point out that during this time, there are many critics of Custer who want to talk about, necessarily why they didn't like him, but also people who want to talk about why he didn't come back from the battlefield, who he was as a person, his whole life story, things like that. And anytime either critics or historians wanted to publish something, well, there's always a little voice from the peanut gallery saying, no, that's wrong, you're incorrect, that's not how things went, and it was Libbie. So a lot of people decided to wait until she died to publish anything. However, she lived to the age of 91. So she outlived a lot of his critics, but she also was featured in some silent movies and things like that. But that's kind of where the Custer story ends here at the fort. I mentioned this earlier, but when the fort decommissioned, again, the settlers basically stripped this place clean. But it wouldn't become a state park until the first Roosevelt. Now, Teddy loved making state parks. One of the things he's really most known for, that and being a trustbuster. But he's established this as North Dakota's first state park. After that, though, we kind of just laid bare until the next Roosevelt. FDR came along and, with his Civilian Conservation Corps, built these stone foundations here, built everything at the infantry post, and built the visitor center. In '89, we started the insert program, which we're all now part of. And when they started building this building here and all the white buildings around this area. And now it wasn't just by the help of the state parks. That was with the assistance of the Army Corps of Engineers and the local historical society. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed the tour. If you have any final questions or quotes or anything, let me know. If you guys want to tell me something got wrong, feel free to tell me that too. I can always try to improve my stuff here. Maybe we can compare notes.
What was Custer's age at Little Bighorn?
He was 36.
36.
Yes.
Did
And
they have
Libbie-
any kids?
Say it again?
Did they have any children?
No. So, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but when Custer was at was at West Point, he contracted gonorrhea, and the treatment for that would have been with mercury. So he would have been sterile. Yeah. Any other questions?
Libby lived until the 30s, right?
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
Yeah. She lived quite a long time.
How do you pronounce her name?
Elizabeth Custer or Libbie.
Okay.
Something I'd like to mention about her is that shoot, just a brain fart. I forgot what it was. Frick, I'm sorry. I just brought something up and then I couldn't remember what it was.
Children.
She never remarried.
Oh, yes, thank you. That was it. You read my mind. But yeah, she never remarried. This is for a couple reasons. Part of it is because she was ridiculously in love with Custer, and I think the idea of marrying someone else would have been completely foreign to her. But also, she was a widow in debt. Custer had played the stock market poorly, and he bought a silver mine which didn't produce any silver. So he would have left her in debt. Now, she did get some money from his retirement fund. She had a pension, and also Custer actually took out a life insurance policy during the battle, not during the battle, but right before the Black Hills expedition. And she was able to get most of that money. Granted, didn't pay for the whole debt, but she was able to get by pretty well.
And then her speaking engagements and stuff, I imagine that was income for her?
Say that again?
Her speaking engagements
Oh, yes,
and that, I imagine,
yes.
was income for her?
That would have been a way to make money. As well, she published books. And I mean, they're still being published today, so they're pretty popular. They're making her a lot of money, too.
So by this point, the Mandan were gone, or up north.
Yes, so the Mandan wouldn't really have been living here. The only capacity they were still here at the fort was that there were some scouts. Again, they would have been not much trouble fighting Lakota Sioux and things like that. Any other questions?
After the 7th left here, how many people would have been on the fort grounds at that point? Did they,
You mean the battle?
yeah, after they left for the Little Bighorn expedition, what was here? Who would have been?
That is a good question. I don't necessarily have the answer to. There would have still been all the laundresses. I don't believe many, if any of them came. All their children. They had a lot of children here. Each laundress usually have about 10 children on average. So that alone is going to be at least 3 laundresses, so over 100 people. But there were people that you don't necessarily bring with you on a military campaign. And they would have had, I think it was mostly a skeleton crew really defending the fort, because again, this place they never expected it to really get attacked. There's no walls or anything. It was really the place for deploying troops. I don't have any specific numbers or anything. All right, any other things?
The fort that's up on the hill,
Yes.
was that here during the deployment too? Or?
Yes, they would have kept it. There would have been no point tearing it down. They only had, again, 2 companies of infantry, I believe. But they would have just kept it and staffed it and things like that. The fort was just a little segmented because of it.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions?
That fort's up at that flag up there? We
Yeah.
haven't been up there yet.
Yeah. Most of the stuff up there is going to be panels with foundations outlinings, but there's also some blockhouses you guys can climb up and go to the top of and things like that. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the tour. You got a lot of questions.
One last question.
Yes.
How were you able to attain the history information?
Say that again.
How were you able to attain the history information?
How were we able
Was
to...
it passed down to you verbally, or did you?
Oh, so when I got here, my boss gave me about 4 books to read. 2 of them on Custer, 2 of them on the Mandan. And then I had to go on a bunch of tours with my other interpreters who were more experienced. And you kind of get information from that and make sure everyone is on the same page. After that, so we all do our little bits of independent research. Each interpreter here is a little bit of an expert on different things because we had to do our own presentations and things like that. And we each attend each other's presentations, so we're all pretty knowledgeable of what's going on here before back in the day.
Interesting.
Your first hand tour, would you be a private?
I would be a private. I got no stripes or anything.
Right, yeah.
Not too much is different, but unless you guys really like to engage with me, then I'll be like, yeah, I was at the Black Hills expedition and things like that. But otherwise, it's not too much different. And also, like, I wouldn't talk about the Battle of Bighorn inside and things like that. Or the Grant administration thing.
we talked earlier, that's a lot. That even in the Black Hills, but even to the Little Bighorn, it's just a large chunk of land that when they're leaving this fort, it's just
Yeah, because that's in Montana.
yeah, exactly.
That would have taken months to get out there.
Oh, yeah. It took them about a month and 2 weeks to get there.
Yeah.
So, quite a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's part of the summer right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the tour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
How do we